In a recent U.S. Senate hearing, Indo-Pacific Commander Admiral Samuel Paparo said this.
China's increasingly aggressive and assertive behavior, their unprecedented military modernization poses a real and serious threat to our homeland, to our allies, and to our partners. China's aggressive military actions near Taiwan are not just exercises, they are rehearsals.
It's a statement he's made before, and a rehearsal is how this year's Balikatan, dubbed the Super Bowl of drills by Bloomberg, is also being described.
We are now treating the exercise as a rehearsal for our defense.
At the 40th Balikatan, most are US and Philippine troops, but Australian, British, French, Canadian, and for the first time, Japanese officers will also participate in this, quote, full battle test. Watch.
We are looking at more or less 14,000 participants on both sides. We do these joint exercises to make sure that all of these not only work as single service operations, but they also work together as part of a joint force.
We're 2 days into Balikatan 2025 on Tuesday, April the 22nd. Do the exercises represent a shift in US allied responses to China in the West Philippine Sea and toward Taiwan? And can this deterrence work on Beijing? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. Joining us today are Renato Cruz de Castro, in the studio this time, from De La Salle University, Department of International Studies, Distinguished Professor and National Zhengzhou University Taiwan Ministry of Foreign Affairs Visiting Fellow, and Tso Chen-dong, National Taiwan University Political Science Professor. A very warm welcome to both of you on the show today. Coined by defense site Stars and Stripes, Ship Killer, the Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction System, or NMESIS, has arrived in the Philippines for the first time. What you can see here are the anti-ship naval strike missiles, and they are precision-guided. They're mounted atop a light tactical vehicle which can be operated remotely. It has a shorter range of 185 kilometers, which provides coverage over tight maritime terrains like the Strait. Renato, let me come to you first. So firstly, why is the NMESIS called the Ship Killer?
Well, it was primarily designed to attack ships, interdiction, the term interdiction, basically to target surface combatants. You know, it's designed primarily by the United States Marine Corps when the Marine Corps, US Marine Corps, shifted away from conducting amphibious operation to what is called archipelagic defense.
And why is it a big deal that NMESIS is in the Philippines?
Well, again, the notion of the fact that it's a preparation for possibilities that might happen based on what is called the Davidson window. The chances are, of course, the People's Republic of China would effect its armed unification of Taiwan. So it's basically showing, as Secretary Hicks had mentioned, when he came to Manila a couple of weeks ago, the alliance should shift primarily in terms of deterrence. So that's part of an effort of deterrence.
And the Davidson window being 2027.
Supposed to be, yes.
Just a few years off. Professor Tso, so the other new capability, along with NMESIS, is MADIS, and that stands for Marine Air Defense Integrated System. And of course, there's also the Typhoon mid-range missile system from last year. How will these different assets work?
Okay, first of all, I think these are for deterrence purposes because they could use these missiles to target ships going through the Bass Channel or any channel that are close to Philippines. And because these channels are very narrow, so as long as the channel's scope is within the scope of the shooting area, then the missile can really make a harm, make a huge harm on the vessels going through this channel. And secondly, because not only Typhoon or these NMESIS, but also in the northern tip of Philippines archipelago, but also in Yonaguni. That is another channel which is very narrow in the wise, and thus is easy to target ships going through that channel. So as long as these two channels are under the range of the US-led missiles, then it would be difficult for PLA Navy ships to go through that to conduct a blockade against Taiwan.
Right. Okay, so its focus does seem to be very much on Taiwan. Renato, tell us about MADIS, which is an air defense system rather than being a missile like the other two.
I think it's primarily aimed to at least provide air protection for the NMESIS. It's just simple. I've seen, for example, you just have a Hammer armored vehicle, then they put a Javelin and several machine guns, primarily aimed against low-flying aircraft and possibly drones. So it's really more of a defensive measure to protect whatever missile system you have, like, for example, protecting the NMESIS and other systems that have been put there, BrahMos, and even, of course, the Typhoon missile.
Yeah, and the ranges are very different, as you were saying earlier, isn't it? 1,600 kilometers for the Typhoon, whereas an 185 kilometer for NMESIS, and just for information, Bashi Strait is 180 kilometers wide. Professor Tso, you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, I want to add something. Yeah, of course, the difference in the range is important. Typhoon system actually can be used to launch missiles toward the mainland China. So that could cause tremendous harm. But in addition, the NMESIS can be moved quickly, easily. And that's the advantage of that.
So fast and agile. Renato, let's talk about the exercises. Now, on the first day, you both mentioned Taiwan crisis. On the first day, media did ask Balikatan spokespeople on the US and Philippine side whether they were drilling for a Taiwan invasion. And of course, they wouldn't say. But let's have a look at those exercises. So defending missile threats, defending an island invasion, and SINKEX, which is sinking a Navy vessel. And the location of the exercises, too, that we should also discuss, close to Taiwan on the northern end, as well as the West Philippine Sea. How important are these scenarios in relation to the security threats faced?
Well, first of all, those scenarios were based on the Mutual Defense Board meeting. So the scenarios basically inform us that they're being discussed closed door in terms of what is discussed. For example, last August 2024, you have a Mutual Defense Board meeting at Baguio City. Then, of course, every 6 months you have. So those scenarios are based on what's being discussed in the Mutual Defense Board. So just looking at, of course, publicly, they will deny it. From the perspective of the Philippine government and the armed forces of the Philippines, were focused primarily on the archipelago. So again, when you look at, of course, the Bashi Strait and the Luzon Strait, they're part, of course, of the Philippine archipelago.
Right. And we've heard, Professor Tso, that Balikatan is a defense rehearsal, not just an exercise. And this is in response to China's drills around Taiwan. As Paparo had said, they're not exercises, but they are rehearsal for blockade invasion. So how is a defense rehearsal different? How did you read that? What's the difference?
The rehearsal or the Balikatan exercise can enhance the interoperability between among the three.
But exercises can do that as well.
Right. But rehearsal is more specific, more target, I think more aiming at a specific scenario. That's the difference between rehearsal and exercise. And also, when it comes to a rehearsal, that means that you probably need to have a specific training before that rehearsal, and that could also help the preparedness of these troops.
What's the biggest difference for you, Renato? And also, if you could comment on comparing the difference between China's not exercises or not drills around Taiwan, but a rehearsal.
Well, in the case of the Chinese, of course, it's primarily offensive. Chinese actions are aimed to alter the status quo, to basically unravel what we call the status quo in the Taiwan Straits. The fact that Taiwan has exercised a degree of autonomy despite China's narrative of, there's only one China. So China's military actions are directed at changing. So the military drills that are being conducted in the Philippines is, of course, primarily from the perspective of the Philippines, it's defensive. But it's also aimed, as a term implied, maintaining stability and peace. So it primarily aimed that we would like to maintain that status quo. We don't want that status quo to be altered. So that's the main difference. Chinese military activities, whether they're exercises, rehearsals, are aimed to, of course, change the situation.
Right. And so if the Balikatan is rehearsal, defense rehearsal, What is the significance in that wording? Does it send a message? Is it a practical difference? What's the significance?
Well, again, going back to what I mentioned, the rehearsal means there's already a plan. There is a script already been written. There's a play that's been written, and what we're doing, it's rehearsing on the stage. So just in case the condition, hopefully, and of course this has been implied by the commanders of both sides, we don't want that rehearsal to become the actual play.
And this is where deterrence comes into play. Professor Tso, so can Balikatan help to maintain deterrence or restore deterrence, as the Trump administration says, in the region? I just want to quote to you what James Glynn, who's the Balikatan Exercises Director on the US side, he stressed that all of these assets, NMESIS, MADIS, Typhon, are about demonstrating the US and Philippines, quote, possess credible combat power that backs up the commitment to an open, free Indo-Pacific. Do you think that Balikatan can help in that deterrence?
Yeah, first of all, it helps the three troops to coordinate with each other when the scenario becomes real. Secondly, it can test the preparedness of those troops, whether they are really prepared, whether they are well trained to deal with those possible scenarios.
And how about the response from China, or the reaction from China? If the deterrence is to work, then we need to also understand the Chinese side.
Yeah, I think, of course, China will also do its exercise, will probably have its own rehearsal. Yeah, that could become a very tense situation. However, that is also the point where the two sides can see how much they can secure the status quo, how much they could win the battle, so that the other side will know probably there is a limit for its overreach.
So the overreach being China's overreach?
Military overreach.
Right, okay. Renato, what do you say to those pro-China Beijing voices that say it's the US who is moving these assets into the Philippines and, Manila doesn't have a say in the matter?
Well, again, this is part of their narrative, that the Philippines is simply a puppet, or simply it has no agency, given the fact, that, of course, that the Balikatan exercise, the entry of those weapon systems, those strategic weapon systems, was, of course, made possible by the decision of the Philippines to have them deployed there. So it basically challenges the idea that the Philippines has an agency, and basically also ignoring the fact that the Philippines has been pushed into a closer alliance with the United States, primarily of Chinese expansionism and, of course, coercive action that China could have conducted against the current administration.
And Professor Tso, what's your take on that issue?
I think the outcome should be a result of both ways interaction. Right? If the United States wants to impose the system onto Philippines, Philippines could still resist it. Yeah, as we see in the previous administrations. Yeah, but today we see that confrontation over the South China Sea or West Philippine Sea has been repeated over and over again. So Philippines has the incentive to draw in American troops, to draw in American power to balance the Chinese power. And that's why I think the installation of such system could be a signal to displace to the Chinese side that the Philippines has a strong power on its back.
Yeah, and Renato, you have a unique insight and position in confirming to us that it's the Marines of the Philippines as well as the Army
yes.
Who have requested each of these assets, these missile systems. Can you explain to us, though, whether it is in the interest of the Philippines to support the US should the US decide to help defend Taiwan? I mean, why would the Philippines, for example, need a Typhon missile system which has got a range of 1,600 kilometers?
Let me narrate to you the story. I had a chance to talk with the Philippine Army commander, General Galido, and he asked me, I asked him how we were able to deploy the Typhoon missile here. He said, at certain point, the Philippines said, yeah, we're conducting this Balikatan exercise, but they don't actually generate deterrence because the deterrence is only generated during the actual military exercise. bring something that would stay here and would enable us to have a credible deterrent capability. That's when, of course, the United States decided to bring in the U.S. Army decided to bring in the Typhoon missile. Initially, of course, the plan was just to have this during the Balikatan exercise, but for one reason or the other, the Philippine Army said, oh, we want to basically know more about the Typhoon missile. So until now, the Typhoon missile is still there, and there are possibilities that a second Typhoon missile might be deployed. And of course, it had already been announced by General Glenn that the NMESIS would stay up to Exercise Kamandag, up to November. So those are basically aimed to ensure that you have deterrence, active, credible deterrence whole year round.
But is it a deterrence against Chinese expansionism in the South China Sea, or is very clearly a Taiwan invasion?
I think it's really more of a Taiwan invasion, realization. That's why, of course, early on in the Marcos administration, the decision to add 4 EDCA sites in Luzon. Calculation there, of course, is Taiwan. But this did not happen only during the Marcos administration. The realization that any threat against Taiwan will be a threat to the Philippines, interestingly happened during the Duterte administration, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. No less than the president who was seen as appeasing China realized that Taiwan is an important and vital interest to Philippine national security.
Interesting point to make there. Okay, let's go to the next question. In an April 10th hearing in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Admiral Paparo spoke about the need for the U.S. to maintain, quote, the high ground. He said, if you do not hold the high ground along the First Island chain, you are vastly limited in your ability to operate. So ceding air superiority is not an option if we intend to maintain capability against our adversaries and the ability to support our allies. Professor Tso, give us a perspective then on why it's so important to maintain the First Island chain for the U.S.
First of all, freedom of navigation. I think that's the very core principle of the modern international maritime law. And the United States definitely want to keep the freedom of navigation for its own ships and for all ships going through this area. I think that's the first reason.
And why, in terms of a Taiwan crisis, is this line so important?
There's another scenario we have to take into account. If the Taiwan contingence does happen, then there is a need for Philippines and Japan to evacuate their nationals living in Taiwan. And for that purpose, the Philippines and Japan need to make sure that their vessels can still go through this channel, the channels around Taiwan, and to go to Taiwan and to take their nationals back home. And because of that purpose, to keep the First Island chain out of the war, to keep the First Island chain able to accommodate those ships is very important for not only United States, but also U.S. allies, such as Philippines and Japan.
Recently, Renato, the U.S. agreed to send 20, I think, F-16s to the Philippines. This is obviously a big deal. Can you help us to piece together some of the other pieces of this jigsaw that enable the U.S. to achieve this air superiority, or to achieve this high ground on the First Island chain? For example, Japan for the first time will participate in Balikatan, and also the Prime Minister will visit Philippines, I believe, this week.
Well, of course, again, going back to the notion of the First Island chain, the weakest link in the First Island chain is no less in the Philippines. And it's because of the state of the armed forces of the Philippines. For the last 75 years, the armed forces of the Philippines had focused primarily on internal. So, of course, the naval and air capabilities are, of course, not on par on what Taiwan or Japan or other even ASEAN countries have. So this is an effort on the part of the United States to at least put some efforts to ensure that the weakest link in the First Island chain is, of course, strengthened. But at least at this point in time, 20 F-16, which will be, of course, a dramatic change in terms of the capability of the Philippine Air Force.
Absolutely. And then Japan, of course, has F-35s. Now, according to the Philippine military, 5 underwater drones were found in Philippine waters between 2022 and 2024. These devices with Chinese markings were capable of gathering information that could aid in, quote, underwater warfare, the country's military said. At least one had relayed a signal to China. Watch this.
They have the capability to receive, to process, to store, and to transmit data through satellite communications to a station on land, to a mothership, or to other drones.
3 of the drones were found off the north coast of the Philippines' main island of Luzon, including 2 near the Balikatan Channel south of Taiwan. 2 others were retrieved from, quote, critical choke points near Masbate Island in the central Philippines and the southern island of Mindanao. Professor Tso, let me ask you, what is the strategic significance of these particular waters?
Okay, of course, these waters are located in a very in places of strategic importance. Whether it's close to the Bass Channel, the key channel for Taiwan's safety, and also those channels are close to the South China Sea. I think that's the first point we need to be aware of. And secondly, because of the confrontation between PLA and Philippines Navy ships, so these places are potential flashing points between these 2 armies. And so that's why collecting information about these waters becomes critically important, not only for Philippines, but also for China.
Again, Renato, give us some specific scenarios. I mean, what sort of intelligence are they gathering? Do they want to monitor? Do they want to control these waterways?
No, primarily, I think, as mentioned by Admiral Roy Trinidad, is primarily for submarine warfare. And they were found in the central part of the Philippines, the Visayas Island, where, of course, you have 2 very important choke points to the Pacific. Number 1 is the San Bernardino Straits, separating, of course, Luzon from, I think, Samar. Then further south, of course, you have the Surigao Straits. Those were areas where you have major naval battles during the Second World War, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. So those are access points from the South China Sea. You go to the archipelagic internal waters of the Philippines. Then voila, you go, of course, to the Pacific. That's where, of course, China's submarines could basically interdict reinforcement coming from Guam or Hawaii, going either to Luzon or going, of course, to Taiwan. So that's important there. They're looking at waters surrounding 2 very important choke points in the central Philippines, San Bernardino Strait and, of course, Surigao Strait.
Right. And so is this so that the Chinese submarines, which we assume will be stationed in the South China Sea, at those militarized outposts that they have built, can also, as you said, move across to the Pacific?
Inside the internal waters of the Philippine archipelago.
So in terms of that, does that mean that, in effect, this is all China's efforts, Professor Tso, for China to try to break through the first island chain?
Of course, China wants to expand its military reach in the Pacific Ocean to break through first island chain, to break through second island chain. However, we need to know that these drones are discovered throughout the last several years. And what does that mean? That means that the PLA has conducted a series of investigation and preparation for its military maneuver in this region for quite a long time.
Now, in mid-April, Google Maps was found to have labeled parts of the South China Sea near the Philippine coast as the West Philippine Sea. Google has since clarified that the term was always visible. The update has simply made it more visible at lower magnifications of the map. Renato, let me come to you. President Marcos Jr. was over the moon, of course, at the development and described it as growing acceptance of Manila's claim essentially over its own EEZ, exclusive economic zone, in the face of Chinese threats. What do you make of the change?
Google is a private company, so I won't give too much importance to us. It's more in terms of publicity. Whether that publicity would last for a long time, of course, is another matter. So I don't think Google represents the voice of the international community. Well and good, it's being popularized, but whether it would stick out there and, of course, have greater Geopolitical implication, of course, is another matter.
Professor Tso, the Chinese embassy in Philippines has lodged a formal protest. I guess that's to Google. We can wait to see if this achieves any change. But why would such a small change worry Beijing?
I think that's typical Beijing behavior. I'm not surprised at all. But we also need to understand that the fact that Google put West Philippine Sea on its map reflect the fact that that term has been raised several times or many times so that Google put it on its map. Yeah, of course, in international systems, naming of the sea or naming of the island needs a mutual consultation. So the private company does not follow that rule. But the fact that more and more people use that term could lead to some mutual consultation in international organization.
Absolutely. And Renato, should Google adopt the other EEZs of other countries around the South China Sea or around the 9-10- line, what next?
I don't know. It's a private company. It has its own motives, probably.
Okay, let me rephrase it. Let me rephrase it.
That's good.
What will China do? What will Beijing?
Well, again, China would react the same way as I remember. Of course, remember the movie about Barbie, where Vietnam protested over the fact that you have supposed to be a 9-9, even the Philippines. So those are petty issues primarily addressed to the popular media, but nevertheless, they're triggered geopolitical nerves of countries that are very sensitive to those popular expressions.
We can edit there. Okay, thank you so much, Renato Cruz de Castro and Tso Chen-dong for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.